The Canadian government has screwed every single Canadian over with not keeping up with the housing demand. Now the most desirable places to live in Canada are no longer affordable for people to live in them. And even worse, Justin Trudeau's plan is going to screw up the Canadian housing market even worse for the future. And there's certain aspects of the Canadian economy and what the Trudeau government is doing that is literally going to make it impossible for young Canadians to buy real estate in the future. Let's go over how bad the Canadian government is screwing people over. In 2022, the Canadian Housing and Mortgage Corporation reported that Canada, by the time 2030 came around, would have to build 5.6 million homes in order to keep up with the current demand and to make housing more affordable for Canadians. This is absolutely critical because last year Canada saw around 1 million in population growth, and this was 96% due to immigration. Now let's reflect on what Justin Trudeau planned on doing in order to keep up with this demand. He's setting a goal of building 2.6 million homes over the next decade, which would be a 3.3 million shortage on what the Canadian Housing Corporation is saying we need in order to keep up with the demand. And this is a factor that I really learned play into being the most important aspect of why Canadian housing has gone through the roof compared to anywhere else in the world. And I'm going to share the insights that normally reflected on the economy on which way the real estate market would cycle. And this is personally where I got the real estate market wrong, because when interest rates rise, I 100% thought that the real estate market was going to cool and retract a substantial amount in its pricing on average in order to make housing more affordable. And now we've seen the most consecutive rate hikes by the Bank of Canada, but it has real estate prices reflected that much? Let's dive into it. So typically, when you see about a 1% increase in interest rates, this has about a 10% effect on the real estate market. So these are proportional. So if interest rates go down 1%, that means that real estate prices typically will go up 10%, and because your borrowing power has gone up 10%. So if we reflect back in COVID times when interest rates were around 3% and we absolutely had a knee-jerk reaction of dropping them to zero, this had about a 30% effect on borrowing power and the real estate market. And then you put in the factor of ultra low supply in every single housing market across Canada. This caused for an absolute eruption in the real estate market, causing prices to get to unthinkable levels over the last 3 years. But now let's take it back at where we're at currently in this period in time. We have interest rates at 5%. So doesn't that typically mean that the market should have pulled back on average between 40 to 50% just going off of what the interest rates were pre-COVID times? So last February is when we saw the absolute peak in 2022, where in Canada, the average single family home price reached $816,000. This is when inflation absolutely exploded and started crippling everyone around Canada. So the Bank of Canada had to act fast and started to raise interest rates more aggressively than they ever had in the history of Canada. Where from February 2022 to June 2022, you saw a reduction of about $151,000 in the average price when we saw those interest rates rise, coming down to a national average of $664,000 here in Canada, which would add up to be around a 19.6 loss from the February highs. So right then and there, with how much we were rising the current interest rates, the market was reflecting exactly what was going on. But here's now where things don't add up and don't make sense. Now we take June of 2023, where the Bank of Canada have risen rates up to 5%, which literally means it has doubled since last June, meaning that shouldn't we have seen about a 25% reduction from last June's prices, going with how typically interest rates affect the housing market. And as of right now, where we're sitting, the average home price in Canada is $709,000. So we've seen a 6.7 increase in pricing, not an actual 25% reduction, reflecting on how much people's borrowing power have gone down with the current mortgage rate. And this is where it really has me scratching my head, where I've been completely wrong trying to put my opinion in thinking of where we're going to head into the real estate market. And how I typically always advise clients is, hey, let's take it where we're at now. This is how we go. If I had the crystal ball, I certainly would be doing a lot of other things and be way better off if I was able to predict the way the market was going. But everyone has their hunches. Everyone has their speculation on, hey, if we're going to see a 4.5% increase in interest rates in a year time, I thought the real estate market was typically probably going to crash for about 2 years, and then we'd have a flattening out. Where now we're seeing it actually rise, even though interest rates have doubled from this time last year. So that leads us to the golden question is, why hasn't the real estate market gone down? And here I would love to hear from my viewers in the comments below. Drop in the comments exactly why you think the housing market hasn't reflected the current state of the economy here in Canada, and why we haven't seen a bigger pullback on pricing. For me, I believe this all leads to the Canadian government and how poor of a job Justin Trudeau is doing in terms of managing the Canadian housing market. The lack of physical policy will not keep up with the demand that we need for housing. The amount of immigration that Canada is seeing, we cannot keep up to it. We've already seen young people that think that they'll never be able to purchase a home in their lifetime, and it's only going to get worse with us having a $3.3 million deficit in the amount of housing we need in order to keep up with it over the next decade. Just to put that in perspective, Canadian housing prices have rose 375% over the last 2 decades. This is the largest increase anywhere in the world. Where you say typically before, a family would need 3 to 4 times of your gross income was what you would be able to afford. In these larger cities like Toronto and Vancouver, households, if they were able to borrow up to it, would need 12 to 10 times their current income just in order to afford what the average single family home price is in these markets, making it extremely difficult for people to actually purchase real estate in this market if they're not moving up or downsizing, where they've seen that lift on their current home where they purchased it for $300,000 20 years ago, and now they're selling it in Vancouver for 1.9. These are the only people that are actually able to get into this market who are living off the very standard Canadian jobs that most people in Canada have. I would love to hear your guys' opinion in the comments below, what the Canadian government should do to help us get the affordability crisis in Canada under control. This is an absolute crisis, and it's affecting young people, how they live their lives. And if you're really concerned on why people can't afford homes, I made a video breaking down everything that goes into today buying a house and why we can't actually afford it, and how much things have gone up compared to when your parents were buying their first home. You're going to want to check out that video right here.